Our second story of the night is the Bank of Canada. So the Bank of Canada has sounded the alarm on low productivity. So this is a story that came out of, well, it was a comment made by a senior Bank of Canada official. Her name is Caroline Rogers, and she's the senior deputy governor of the Bank of Canada. And basically, she says that she's taken a look at the economy, the Canadian economy, and where inflation is headed, and where the GDP numbers and all of that. And she thinks that we're in a little bit of trouble, to say the least. So she says that those signs that say in an emergency break the glass. Well, it's time to break the glass. So yeah, she's not holding back really. She's straight up calling it an emergency, and I think this has something to do with the graphic that we showed last episode. So in case you guys missed that last episode, I'll try to find that graphic again. But it's basically a chart of the American GDP per capita versus the Canadian GDP per capita, where both countries took a big hit during the pandemic, but the Americans, in terms of a real GDP per capita basis, has recovered and has gone way higher than where they were before the pandemic, whereas Canada has fallen, and we've never really recovered to pre-pandemic levels in terms of GDP per capita. And in fact, we're trending our way down. And I think we're currently at where we were back in 2017. So we've regressed a lot. So I think this is what Caroline Rogers was getting at, where there's a dichotomy forming between the US economy and the Canadian economy. Yeah, basically, productivity is just another term for GDP, and GDP growth is that Canada's GDP and productivity is just falling. Yeah, basically, there's some reasons that she elaborated on that might be causing it. So she brought up the changing demographics, which is definitely a big one, but also climate change, right? Putting pressure on prices. So there's a lot of debate that we could have as to what the exact cause is, and this is kind of what I wanted to bring up. So my first question might be, what do you guys think is causing this dichotomy to form between the Canadian and the American economy in terms of GDP per capita? And maybe a follow-up question to that is, do you think that climate change or any other factors are a big contributor to that, or what do you think is the major contributor to that? So let me toss the question to whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, so with regards to what is causing this issue, I think it's definitely a multivariable problem. Canadian productivity tends to lag the US in general. Historically, a lot of that has to do with the fact that American employees tend to get more investment from their companies to their employees, whereas Canadian companies tend to do less investment, and that's just a general average over many years. But I think some of these, with regards to some changing demographics, I can see that there is a lot less incentive for the kind of the hustle culture of the American side, where they feel like they need to hustle and go hard and become rich, etc. And there's a lot more people in the US who are willing to do that, and everything is kind of, people tend to encourage that. There's a bit of a cultural encouragement to that that we don't quite have as much here. And I think honestly a lot of people are getting they're getting really jaded with the current economic state of the country, where it feels like you work super hard, you get, maybe not, you don't necessarily see the fruits of your labor in a lot of a lot of careers, and particularly when you can see cost of living is skyrocketing, and you can work as hard as you want, but you're going to be losing in terms of purchasing power no matter what you do. So I think that also has a impact on people's willingness to go even harder when they're like, what's the point? Like, if I can survive paycheck to paycheck without adding an extra, you know, 20 hours on every week, why am I going to put in that extra time, that extra work, get a hustle or whatever, when it's not like I'm going to be able to afford a house or improve my standard of living significantly anyway. So it's a little bit like, what's the point? I think that's a factor that's really kicking in.
Ha ha ha. I had time to think. So like here's what I kind of see. Um I think it's just circumstantial. I think a lot of the big S&P 500 companies are mostly American, and that contributes as to why the American economy is so successful, because these S&P 500 huge companies know how to somehow some way make money, and so that's just giving them more of a head advantage, I guess. And also I don't think as Canadians we're not building enough houses for like the amount of people that are living in our country, and then that can contribute to a lot of issues. And then not to mention the carbon tax that it's going to get a lot worse after April 1st. I think life in Canada is just a little more expensive. Sure, we have healthcare, but I don't know how much that actually helps us versus like the other benefits down there in the States. And otherwise, uh, I think it's oil. Sorry, I was trying to remember. I think our oil regulation's really weird here. How we get it and where we get it from. When we have oil in like Alberta and stuff, but it's not necessarily given to us like domestically. It's like, and then we get oil like internationally from somewhere else. I don't know the specifics, but I think that's really odd. It's just like a snowball of a bunch of different things that can affect us to why our GDP is ASS, PG. So yeah.
Yeah, I think on the oil regard, I think that we do lack a lot of the infrastructure to refine the oil into something we can use for like our cars and such. So at least in the past, I'm not sure if this is currently the state, but at least in the past, we used to send all our oil to the states to be refined, and then they would send some of it back or consume most of it, honestly. So just to clarify that.
Yeah, I mean, what you guys both said are incredibly true, and on one note that you said earlier, Tristan, I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said that people are just feeling jaded and feeling like they're giving up. Right? Basically, I spend a lot of time on Twitter or X, now that is called, and I just see a lot of Americans even starting to comment on economic news in Canada, which never used to really see before. Maybe I didn't pay as much attention to the news before, like when I was younger, but I do feel like the amount of just people not, I'm assuming they're Americans, but because they're speaking English, but it could be from like places in Europe as well, and other places. But I just see like people outside of Canada commenting on Canadian news, and it's like that moment where, let's say you're living in an apartment and the person that lives right above you is playing loud music all the time and like partying, and like I feel like that's like the apartment upstairs is Canada, and then everyone else is in like the apartment underneath, and they're all just like taking a broomstick and like poking the ceiling and be like, hey, what are you guys doing up there? Right? Like the entirety of the Canadian economy is just kind of going off the rails at the moment. And I don't want to sound like a doomer, because I don't think it's so bad that it can't be fixed. But it's just, if you look at inflation, that's squeezing people from one end, and then you look at like per GDP capita, that's squeezing people from the other end. It's just like, yeah, I can see why. So young people are not motivated, and productivity is going down. And also on productivity going down, another major reason I think is that people are getting laid off from their full-time 40-hour per week job, and then they're getting 2 or 3 part-time jobs for like 10 to 20 hours per week. So you're losing a lot of productivity there, because you're getting rid of a high-paying, high-quality job, and that person probably went to school to get a degree to be able to get that high-paying job in the first place, and then they're working like a shift at Tim Hortons, and they're working, a shift at like, being a personal trainer, or they're working a shift at like an Amazon warehouse, wherever people are working that like don't pay as much, right? Like minimum wage jobs. So you're really decreasing productivity when you do that. When you get rid of high paying jobs and you're replacing them with low paying part time jobs, and yeah, basically like this is also a point of note for the government where they can kind of like inflate the jobs numbers and pretend that they're doing a good job because they're like, look how many jobs we added, right? But if you just dig a little deeper, you'll see that a lot of the jobs that we have been adding ever since the recovery from the pandemic, it's been part-time jobs, and we've actually been losing a lot of high quality, especially white collar, like office jobs, right? So yeah, basically I think that's part of the problem. But I think the whole climate change thing, I might say something that's slightly controversial, but bear with me here. I'm not a climate change denier, okay? So just let me get that out. I think that climate change is real and it's man-made and it's a huge issue. However, I think the whole climate change narrative is being leveraged by the government to kind of justify a lot of things that they're doing, like raising the carbon tax, for instance. That's the biggest one, and also kind of shifting the blame on the economic downturn, right? Because as the Bank of Canada deputy governor said, climate change is putting pressure on prices, and I'm like, is climate change really so bad that it's like causing inflation and causing like the real GDP crisis? Is I feel like there's other bigger issues that are causing it, right? I.e., like runaway government spending, and just like irrelevant tax policies, and just like the bureaucracy and making it difficult to like build new housing, making it difficult to like drill for oil, for instance, like Dom said, like just making it hard to do business in general, right? And I know like Trudeau just announced his new budget where he's like really cracking down on landlords, so he's making it more difficult to be a landlord, basically, right? So and it's in the name of protecting renters, which like I agree that landlords shouldn't be able to just evict people for like no apparent reason, but if you increase the burden that landlords have to make to be a landlord, then you're just going to make the housing crisis worse. So I think that a lot of our issues are the result of bad government policy and not because of climate change. I think the climate change narrative is being utilized by our politicians to kind of shift the blame, and to also have an excuse to tax you more. But this is just my opinion. Let me pass it off to you guys. Like, what do you guys agree with that, or do you want to add anything to that?
I think there are some impacts of climate change on our economy that will have some impact that that they're referencing, like for example, like the forest fires. I understand that those aren't necessarily directly correlated to climate change, but as a rule of thumb, we get more aggressive weather patterns with more climate change. And so forest fires, etc., they happened in the past, and while they are not necessarily like only an indicator of climate change, they are part of a wider array of climate challenges that the world has been having, that have been causing problems across the world, right? And in this way, I think that there definitely will be some economic impacts from that overarching climate change factor that is going to be negatively impacting our economy, particularly in places that are being currently affected by them, like a drought or forest fires, etc. So I don't think we should necessarily say that they are. Not that you're saying that they weren't an impact, but I think we do need to acknowledge that they are causing some of the issues that we're seeing. That being said, I don't know if I can see our government managing that crisis particularly efficiently, and as a result, I think that more of the problems that are the average Canadian sees has to do with poor governance rather than climate change itself, if that makes sense.